Hello, this is Michael Croteau and Paul Spiteri. We are conducting an interview today, hopefully the first interview of many regarding all of Meteor House's books, but we're starting with this one of our newest ones. Paul and I are co-owners of Meteor House, and Paul, in this instance, is the editor of one of our new books, A Rough Night for the Queen by Philip Jose Farmer. This is the uncorrected proof of the paperback. We don't have a proof here of the hardcover yet. It's being manufactured by a different printer. We have signature sheets going around the country or going around the world. Hopefully those will get here soon. But as I said, Paul's the co-owner of Meteor House. He is the editor of this book, and we're going to talk about it. So let's dive straight in. Paul, when did you first hear of Sir Richard Francis Burton?
Well, I guess being British and Richard Burton being British as well, he did come up at school. I learnt about him at the same time I learnt about Stanley and Livingston, people like that. And I guess the name stuck as much as anything because of Richard Burton, the actor as well. So he was always in my consciousness. But I think it was reading To Your Scattered Bodies Go and the following Riverworld novels that really brought Burton to life, and the way Phil talked about Burton and how we put snippets of Burton's real earthly life, if you like, into those books really sparked an interest. Obviously, these were in the days before Google, so no Wikipedia. I couldn't do that kind of research, but certainly, encyclopedia. So I found out everything I could about the guy, and was fascinated by him, from that point onwards, really.
Do you remember how old you were at that point?
Well, so I started reading Farmer when I was about 14, 15. And Riverworld, the Riverworld short story was probably the first thing I ever read by Phil. But I soon went on to the Riverworld series. So certainly still a teenager. So
okay.
Probably 16 or so, yeah.
Yeah, I started reading Farmer in high school, but didn't read Riverworld till I got to college. So, all right. Now, it's interesting you say that because, Phil has this effect on people where you read about things and people he's interested in, and then you want to go in and do further reading on them. Phil got me to read Fawn Brody's biography of Burton, The Devil Drives, and I also bought a really nice edition of, The 1001 Nights, which I still haven't read. Have you ever read, Burton, most people don't realize, was an author. He wrote dozens of books. Have you ever read any of those?
I have. I mean, I read some of the Arabian Nights. I've not read them all. Certainly, as a child, and I'm sure you did as well. As a child, you probably read a version of the Arabian Nights. Might not have been Burton's version, but some of those stories are just great adventure stories. Sinbad, Ali Baba, all those. So certainly read all of those. Like you, I read biographies. I was led to Fawn Brody, Edward Rice, Stephen Dearden, all great biographies of Burton I really enjoyed. I read a great chunk of Burton's own writing, mostly as research, if I'm honest, but I've read probably most, if not all, of the Africa books. When he talks about his wandering in Africa, as much as anything, as part of the exercise of preparing for this publication, I just wanted to immerse myself into Burton, really. So I read as much as I could. I read great chunks of the Cassadar, various other pieces. There's so much more I want to read. His Camoan stuff, the stuff he translated from Camoans, or for Camoans, the Lyria, particularly really want to get into some of that, and I'm hoping to have that time, hopefully in the future to get into that. But yes, certainly Farmer led me to Burton, and I've really enjoyed appreciating Burton's writing, and it is fantastic. It's very descriptive. When he talks about his adventures, it's it's unputdownable in parts, and you start reading a section, and then I'll just read the next bit and the next bit, and before you know it, you've traveled this journey in his footsteps.
Wow. I've actually got Phil's, most of Phil's Burton library here that I'm selling for his estate. I might need to read those before I let before I let him out the door.
They're quite pricey ones, aren't they, as well?
They are. They are. I
ones.
should have. If I was smart, I'd have a stack of them here. I'd be now selling them, pitching them. Only $1,200. Only 3,000, because they are mostly very expensive editions. Yeah, Phil
I've looked at.
really collected Burton. Now you mentioned one thing, the Cazada. For those people who don't know, what is that?
So it's an epic poem that Burton wrote. He wrote it as if he was somebody else. So it's he wrote it as if he was Arabic, and Burton was translating that that epic poem into English. So he's his own translator, if you like. And I talk a little bit about that in my introduction to the book. So I won't go into too much here, but it's a really interesting concept, I think, to to write something as somebody else and then translate it and then he annotates. So it's all wheels within wheels. It's it's an epic story. I think from memory we put a quote, or I put a quote from it on the back of the book, because it's just full of these couplets that just resonate and just have such insight into the human condition. So it's definitely a great read, and I think if I had to recommend something, if you like, unique from Burton, something that Burton himself wrote, his fiction, that would be it, the Cazadar. I mean, his travel writings are what he's known for, obviously, and they are definitely worth reading, but the Cazadar is very, very special, definitely worth exploring if you get a chance. It's long,
Okay.
I think most of his stuff, if not everything, you can find online. There's PDFs of pretty much all his works available just to read whenever you want to.
Okay.
And I'm sure we'll get onto it, but there are a couple of websites. One immediately springs to mind that I'm sure we'll talk about, where there is a plethora of stuff that you can lose yourself in without having to go and buy anything, because they are pricey volumes if you buy the originals.
Yeah, the publisher in me was just sitting here thinking, hey, I wonder if those are in the public domain. Not that we've ever published any public domain work, but the thought just hit me.
Well, it's a great thought, and I think the benefit, what we could add to it, is just trying to interpret it for a more modern audience. And I think and that's one of the things I've tried to do in this piece, is just try to position it by adding footnotes, by my introduction, by the other introductions, by some of the other bonus material that we've included in the book, just to make it a bit more of a package. It's not just the text that Phil wrote, albeit obviously that is the core part of it.
Gotcha. And we'll get back to the book in a second, but talking about this makes me think, Sir Richard Francis Burton was the protagonist of the first Riverworld story, and I then went and read the biography, as you did too. But Mark Twain was the protagonist of the second Riverworld novel, and I, of course, like everybody else, I read some Mark Twain before I got to Riverworld, but I read much more Mark Twain after that, and I really, really appreciated Mark Twain. The Innocents Abroad is still possibly the funniest book I've ever read. And so it makes me wonder, other than Burton and Twain, has Phil led you to a greater appreciation of any other historical characters?
Yep. Certainly Cyrano de Bergerac, who I knew of before anyway. I was quite a fan, but certainly brought him more to life. Aphra Byrne, who was an English female writer back in the 1600s. I believe she was the first female writer, certainly in Western Europe, to support herself from her writing. Very interesting life, as a side project. Anybody wanting to look into the life of Aphra Byrne won't be disappointed. Fascinating story. Alice Hargreaves, so or Alice Liddell, as she was, who was Alice in Wonderland, or the template for Alice in Wonderland. And I guess also William Marshall, a very minor character in Riverworld, but William Marshall lived in the 1200s. Very famous knight. Not a lot was particularly known about him. Most of our information comes from another epic poem written by a relatively anonymous writer called John the Troubadour, who gave us a history of William Marshall. So William Marshall served a number of kings in that time. He supported King John, and he was with King John at the sealing of Magna Carta at Runnymede, so he was very important at that time, and he acted as regent to John's son when John died. And he helped repel an invasion by the French. I think it's called the Battle of Lincoln. I can't remember the exact date, but he was in his 70s and he led from the front.
Wow.
So I've always been fascinated with William Marshall, and that certainly spun out of reading about him through Phil. And in fact, I even went on to write a story about William Marshall and Phil. They both appear in the same story. I won't explain how, but called The Maréchal, which is in this, The Worlds of PJF, number 4, Protein Dimensions.
Oh, that's number 1,
a short
actually.
Story. Oh, was it?
Yeah, look at the spine.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, you're right. Yep, it's definitely this one. Sorry about that.
It's been so long since we published those.
Yep, Le Maréchal, definitely in that one. I got that bit right. But, yep, fascinating character. And again, and one of those lives that almost never happened. At a very young age, he was almost killed, get involved in a dispute between two families, and he was almost, executed as part of that dispute. He's a very famous knight, won lots of tournaments, toured Europe, then rose up in the hierarchy of English royalty, supported them, as they served a number of kings and acted as regent. Another interesting story, and definitely one I got from Phil. And
from Phil. Yeah, it's Phil led me to PG Wodehouse, and to this day I can't remember how. I think it might have just been sitting in his house having a conversation, and I went and found Wodehouse and then discovered Jeeves and Wooster and fell in love and have read 50 of his books. But when I go search through everything, all the files, whatever, I can't find any reference other than Phil did write a letter to P.G. Wodehouse asking for permission to write a story using one of Wodehouse's characters for Phil's fictional author series.
Right, okay, that's interesting.
He also wrote a letter to Rex Stout. Well, and of course he did write the Rex Stout story, the Paul Chapin, the volcano. But I've seen the letter he wrote to Rex Stout, and Rex Stout gave him permission to write a story under the pen name Paul Chapin. So that was pretty cool.
I do remember speaking to Phil, and he was a big fan of the Fry and Laurie series, Bertie and
okay, yep.
Bertie and Jeeves. So I know he loved that. So I'm wondering if it came out of that same thing as well. I think he knew Wodehouse before then anyway, but I can remember talking to Phil about that series and how much he enjoyed it, as I did. You can't be English and not like Wodehouse.
Yeah, I love Wodehouse, but it's just amazing.
You're an honorary Englishman.
There you go. Honorary Englishman, I'll take it. Yeah, it's just amazing the rabbit holes he'll send you down. Something just sparks an interest, and there's this whole other world I didn't know about.
Riverworld is full of that. You can't read 100 pages of Riverworld without thinking, well, who's that then? Just even the names that it just puts enough in there that makes you think, well, I've got to go and find something else.
Right, and the other thing is, he almost never just made up the character. He never just, it almost never was like, oh, I'm just going to call this guy Jack Smith. There was always something there. It was based on somebody, a real person, a fictional character, a real place. It was a nod to something or somebody. And it's like, you know, I don't think we'll ever know, but it would be so cool. Like if you had an ebook version of all of his books, you could just point to every other word and get this is what Phil's referring to. Just full of Easter eggs all throughout.
And I imagine a lot of them are still to be discovered. You know?
Exactly. Or probably never will be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
People smarter than us will have to read them. All right, getting back on topic. Now, A Rough Night for the Queen has only been published once before. It was in Pearls from Peoria, a massive collection of rarities that you edited for Subterranean Press. And that was back in 2006, before Meteor House was founded. Now, why do you think this piece particularly deserved a standalone edition? And, you know, what other history can you tell us about this short biography of Burton that Phil wrote?
Yeah, so I guess the history first. I think we know Phil wrote the piece originally in mid-1950s as a magazine article. Unfortunately, the publication never picked up on it, so it wasn't published. Phil, I think it's on record as saying he contemplated writing a fuller biography of Burton. Never quite got round to it, and then Vaughan Brody brought out hers in the late 50s, early 60s. And I think by then Phil felt there wasn't much more he could add, so he left it. As to why it warrants its own edition, and I think at the time I probably made a pitch for it to be included in the Centenary collection, but I think quite rightly there's a lot in that fantastic book already, and probably that was a bit of a step too far. And it's not a long piece. As you say, it's a relatively short biography, but it's 100 pages. I think the book comes out to about 100 pages. And I think it is a bit unique in Phil's world, if you like, because Phil wrote quite a lot of non-fiction. He wrote introductions, we've published some of his speeches, he's written articles, but he never wrote a biography in the same way as he wrote this biography. So he's written about Edgar Rice Burroughs, for example. So he has done some of it, but Rough Night for a Queen is a step above that. It's a complete biography. It covers, all of the major events in Burton's life, not in sequential order, but it covers from his birth to his death, with all the major events in between. So I think it definitely did merit, a standalone edition, something that was perhaps a bit more accessible. So I think you can pick up copies of Pearls for not too much money on the internet, but it's something that's just a bit more focused, just something you can pick up if you're interested in Burton, not necessarily in the wider farm world. So I think those reasons, I think that's it's definitely right that after over 50 years, 60 years, there is a standalone version of Rough Night.
I think Phil would have appreciated it.
I think so. Yeah, I think he obviously thought a lot of Burton, and I think actually just having written that much about Burton is a testament to how much Phil thought of Burton, because to go through all that research, and when I was going through it and proofing it and thinking about what other bits to include, I could track back to some of the documents that Phil must have read when he was preparing this, and I could see how he'd taken the best of the best out of what Burton himself had written and perhaps what other people had talked about. But it's definitely a farmer book. you know, it's definitely got farmer's stamp and DNA all the way through it. And that just makes it special. I think for all of us, that makes it special. All of us who love Phil and his work, just makes it such a great read.
Awesome. I look forward, I laid the book out, but I didn't actually read it. I'm looking forward to actually just sitting down and reading it again. It's been probably since 2006 since I've got to actually read it. Now, as the editor of this edition, you were tasked with adding in bonus material. Like you said, it's not just a biography. There's some other things in there as well. Now, how did you decide who to approach for the introductory pieces? And were you initially thinking, let's get experts on Farmer, or let's get experts on Burton, or both? What was your journey there?
Yeah, so I think as well as the introductions, and they are key to it, there was also, I think, a drive from me to make it a fuller package as well. So, there are some interesting photographs, a couple of interesting photographs included. I've added footnotes. I know many people aren't fans of footnotes, but that was a little mini homage to Burton himself for me, because Burton peppered his work with footnotes. Great informative footnotes that really add to what you're reading. We're in a different world now. We have got Wikipedia, Google, all that, and it's a lot easier to do your own research. So I've tried to only put footnotes in that add to the context of what's being talked about. So the sort of things that you might not think to go and look up, but maybe just gives you a bit more information, and maybe sparks something for you to go and and look at something in a bit more detail. Also, and we'll talk about the artwork, because I definitely want to talk about the artwork. But on the back cover, we've included a portrait by George Frederick Watts, it's an unfinished portrait, and there's an interesting story behind that. And I've written a piece, most of the way through a piece that we're going to, I think, publish in the PharmaCon program this year, where I'll talk a bit more about my approach to the book. And I'm going to talk about that portrait, because there's a little interesting story. So I won't give spoilers now, but certainly I'll try and explain that a bit more. But going back to the introductions, because it is that is an important part of the book. So and you and I, we talked about it, didn't we? And I remember having conversations around what are we going to add to this to make it appealing to people? And I think what I wanted was somebody to write from a Burton perspective, somebody to write from a Farmer perspective. So I didn't know anybody in the Burton world, so I went on to burtoniana.org, which is everything you need to know about Richard Francis Burton. Highly recommended. And got in touch with a guy called Michael Walton, who has been absolutely brilliant. We had a little chat, and he agreed to write an introduction for the book, and he turned in a great piece, and it's a joy to read. It really is. And beyond that, over the this period of time developing the book and proofing it, and just working through it, if I had any questions, particularly about Burton, Mick would be my go-to guy, and he just helped and guided me through. He doesn't know, probably not worth knowing. So that was a great piece. And
I actually didn't realize he sort of acted as a consultant for you. That's interesting.
Yep. So when there's some usage of words, some spellings, just all sorts of different little things where I felt, well, Mick will know. So and he was very helpful in that regard, and I'm very grateful to you. And then wanted something from more of a farmer perspective. So went to Mark Hodder, who's the author of Burton and Swinburne novels. Fantastic adventure stories. I think there are 6 in total now, and I love them. They're big volumes.
I think
really
I've read the first 3. I'm far behind. I need to catch up.
Yeah, and great adventure stories. And Mark obviously loved Burton as well. And I actually had met Mark Hodder many years ago. He won't remember, but I went to a signing of his at Forbidden Planet in London, good few years ago, and got one of the Burton and Swinburne books signed. And so I was just in the queue, got to the front, you know, as he was signing my book, I struck up a bit of a conversation with him, mentioned Farmer, you know, and his association with Burton. And he, you know, sprang up, and he actually even went to the bookshelf and picked up a Farmer and brought it back to the table and said, yeah, love Farmer, you know, great. And I loved reading about Burton in To Your Scattered Bodies Go and subsequent Riverworld novels. And yeah, definitely was a spark for me. And so years later, he was a great person to go to. And again, he turned in such a great piece, you know, focusing more on the Farmer side. I couldn't be happy with both of those submissions. And then,
Nice.
sorry, and left me to do a bit of a ramble and add my tuppence in, and just not so much link the two, but just to, what I try to do in my introduction is talk about Farmer and Burton and how they influenced each other, how they influenced other people, any little side issues or questions or asides or Easter eggs, whatever you want to call them, that people might find interesting and might use as a springboard. And you know, and that was a lot of fun just doing that. So yeah, it was. I was really, really pleased, you know, and I hope our readers are as pleased with those extras as I was. But let's talk a bit about the art, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to ask you. You mentioned earlier.
So the cover, which you showed a little while ago, is by an artist called Charles Berlin. I've known Charles for a number of years. In fact, he worked with me on Pearls from Peoria, who did some illustrations then. And he also illustrated a short story I co-wrote with Phil called Getting Ready to Write in 2008.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always loved his imagery. There's always kind of pent-up energy in his images. You always know something's just about to happen. And you know, even in the most serene looking of scenes, you just know there's something there. So I was really pleased when I approached him, and he, you know, immediately said yes, he would love to be involved. We swapped a few emails talking about scenes that might be illustrated. So in the end, Charles did the cover, he did a frontispiece, and also designed the signature sheet for that edition, and did a fantastic job on all three.
Indeed.
Very pleased. And I think, you know, this is going to be iconic art for this book. It's going to, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I love the cover.
Yeah.
Looking at it, that doesn't do anybody any good, but yeah, it's just a great. I love his pencil work.
Yeah, yeah. And the frontispiece inside, don't show that yet.
Okay.
Make that a surprise for people.
We'll make that a surprise.
We'll show the corners or something, but
it's hard to do.
But yeah, great stuff. Very pleased with how all of that stuff turned out. Very very good.
Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I do have this down as my final question for you, which is, how do you think this stands as a biographical piece? You know, after all, as we discussed, there have been many biographies of Burton before and after this one was written. You know, so where does this fit in there?
So, you mentioned earlier, it's not particularly long. It's not the in-depth study that Brodie or Rice or did and wrote. It's, you know, fast-paced. It covers, you know, as I said before, the full life, but it focuses on certain episodes. And I think what I've realised, because I must have read it 3 or 4 times over the last 3 or 4 months, is how clever Phil was with the way he composed the book. You know, he starts with probably the most famous episode in Burton's life, and then takes that as a jumping off point to go back and talk about his birth, talks about these adventures he has, and sometimes it's hard to believe they're real life adventures. They read like fiction in parts. It's just incredible that he actually survived to the age he did. And it even covers his death. And I would, if anybody is interested in Burton, just reading Isabel Burton's description of her husband's last few days and even the last few minutes of his life, it's touching, it's, moving. It's also quite intense, what she, how she wants to position things. And I know she does come in for a little bit of stick for burning a lot of Burton's private papers, but having read some of what she's written about Burton, and okay, it's very complimentary as you would expect, but it has got depth and very interesting view from somebody who probably knew him better than most, even though they must have spent so many years apart over their lifetime, but a very intense love. So I think what Phil has done is he's given us something that if you've read about Burton, whether that be from Riverworld or from Mark Hodder's books or from John Dunning's Bookman's Promise, because
I forgot about
character is Richard Burton in that.
Quick aside, I actually, I'm pretty sure it was the book before Bookman's Promise. I was standing in line at a John Dunning book signing, getting books signed, and I asked him if he'd ever heard of Philip Jose Farmer. And like Mark Hodder, he sort of sat back and he went, I am reading To Your Scattered Bodies Go right now because I'm going to write a book about Sir Richard Francis Burton. And so I got him to inscribe a copy of that other book to, or no, you know what? I'm remembering that wrong. It was The Bookman's Wake, because he inscribed to Philip Jose Farmer, I loved your book about Burton. Here's my book about Burton, or something like that.
Right.
So I created an association copy.
Well done.
So,
and another aside, I did actually write to John Dunning. He's not particularly well, I don't think, but his wife wrote back, because I thought it might be interesting to have an introduction from him to the book, or even a or something. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be. But I think he's pretty much retired now from writing. I think even their bookshop may have closed down, because he used to run a bookshop with his wife. But yeah, that would have been interesting, but not to be.
His first book, Booked to Die, if you're a book collector, you have to read that book. It is amazing.
Yes.
It is absolutely amazing. Someone's at my door. Hold on one second. Oh gosh, this is terrible.
They are fantastic stories, and as Mike said, if you've got any interest in secondhand book collecting, they're just full of interesting facts and processes that people go through to get hold of collectible books, and they're great adventure stories. And the Richard Francis Burton one is kind of a story within a story. So you get Burton as a character, but really it's his journals that people are trying to track down, and that's the thriller around the book. So yeah, and I think it's called The Bookman's Promise, isn't it, Mike? The one with Burton.
I believe so, or The Bookman's Wake, one of those.
Okay, but I'm sure people can look that up.
Probably Promise.
Check that out. But well worth reading. So I was just covering a bit of time.
Nope, I appreciate that. Sorry about that.
So I don't think I answered the question properly. So you asked about positioning. So yeah, however you've come to Burton, whether through any of those sources, I think what Phil has given us is that next step. So you know a bit about Burton from those stories. You want to know a bit more. Something like Brodie is perhaps a bit too daunting at that point. You've got everything you need to know about Burton in one 100-page book. That's a rollicking read. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get bored, and far from it. And I'm sure, 8 out of 10 people who read Rough Night will probably go on to read something more about Burton, because
right,
it will definitely spark something. Because, there's just so many things you can go into.
Well, and that's what happens with Phil. You read about something he's interested in, you become interested, you go do more reading on it. And, that apparently is what led Mark Hodder to write his wonderful series. So that's pretty amazing.
I mean, and it's all circular because Brodie, as well as writing the Burton biography, wrote a biography of Joseph Smith that I'd read a number of years before. And Burton went to Utah and interviewed leading Mormons and wrote about it. And there is a book. I'm trying to think of the exact title, something like Journey to the City of the Saints, something like that, which I haven't actually got, but it's definitely on my list to either get a copy or find an online version and read that, because that almost feels like a full circle then of going from writer to biographer back to the writer.
Right.
That should be an interesting. So it's definitely on my list. And I just want to think if there's anything else I can tell you about the book, but I think we've covered pretty much everything. We've talked about the art, the bonus, footnotes, pictures on the back. It's been a real fun and interesting journey.
Oh, well, the one thing, speaking of a journey, so we've got the paperback, we've got the hardcover limited edition, which we have signature sheets that were printed here in Atlanta, were mailed to Spain, were signed by Mark Hodder. They're on their way to Italy, unless have they arrived there? Do you know yet?
Not yet. Or certainly they hadn't yesterday.
Okay.
I checked in, because Mick lives in Italy most of the year, so he's in Italy at the moment.
After Italy, they'll go to the UK for you to sign, then they'll go to Tennessee for Charles Berlin to sign, then they'll come back to me, and our hardcover, they'll be inserted in, bound, and then we will have the hardcover limited edition, which I don't have here approved for anything to show you. But so there is that. Yeah, we have the paperback edition, the trade edition, and the hardcover limited, which we've only done 150 copies of.
Okay.
And it's, like I said, signed by the 4 people in the book, other than Phil, of course. So quite a nice little collector's item, I think.
And of course, I'm going to take 50 of those copies. So
cool. That'll certainly help our sales. I didn't factor that in. May not have 50 left for you, but we'll see. Should get you at least 40 right now.
Okay. Oh, I'll have to make do.
So I'll send you some extra paperbacks.
Okay. All right. Done.
At the beginning of this, I said that this is, we're going to talk about the book. Hopefully, we're going to eventually do this for all of our books. But I totally forgot to mention, I think, that this is actually for FarmerCon 15, dating this a little bit, placing this in the summer of 2020 here in the middle of a pandemic. We're not having our normal FarmerCon in conjunction with Pulp Fest in Pittsburgh. We're doing FarmerCon virtually, and this video will be popping up online the first week of August, somewhere around there. So
if I give people a clue, because I'm wearing a FarmerCon t-shirt, so that was
there you go. There you go.
Clue from
there you
100th
go.
celebration.
But I should have totally mentioned that.
You just did.
I did. Okay. Should have got it at the beginning, but I got it at the end. That'll work. All right. Anything else, or shall we cut this off so people can get on our Zoom call and we can all have a drink together?
Yes, let's do that. I am very much looking forward to that and seeing some familiar faces, if not in person, at least on a PC screen. So
there you go.
Thank you for your time, Mike. Thanks for that. It's been a really interesting chat, and I could talk about Farmer and Burton all day, and I don't know how long this has been, but it felt like seconds.
Really? Yeah, that went by really quick. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Cheers.